For years, he walked those shiny hallways, mop in one hand, silent strength in the other. James wasn't just a janitor. He was the man who unlocked the building before sunrise and locked it again long after everyone had gone home. He knew every squeaky tile, every flickering light, and every desk that had a story. But still no one really saw him, especially not his boss. Mr. Carlton, the building manager, was the kind of man who wore his suits like armor. He greeted executives with firm handshakes, laughed with supervisors in the break room, and nodded respectfully at the accountants. But when James walked past, nothing. No eye contact. No good morning. Not even a nod. It wasn't just about position. It was something deeper, something more silent and more painful. James felt it every time he cleaned the coffee stain left on Carlton's desk. Every time he emptied the trash can full of crumpled paper that reeked of stress and privilege. And every time he overheard Carlton bragging to visitors about how this place runs like a machine, never mentioning the man who kept the gears turning behind the scenes. But James, he never complained. He showed up every single day. Pressed shirt, quiet smile. He took pride in his work, even if no one else did. Because James knew something that his boss didn't. He knew that life has a funny way of flipping the script. While others looked down on him, he was busy looking ahead. In the dim storage closet, where others thought he just stored mops and bleach, James had built a corner for books. Finance books, real estate books, entrepreneurship guides, dog-eared, scribbled in, read and reread. Because James wasn't just cleaning floors. He was building something. Dreams in silence. Plans in the shadows. Hope even when the world ignored him. Every evening, after the building emptied out and the lights dimmed, James would sit on an old stool near the boiler room and read. 30 minutes a night. Then an hour. Then 2. Nobody noticed. Not the interns. Not the HR manager. And certainly not Mr. Carlton. And yet, while everyone else was climbing corporate ladders, James was building his own staircase. It started with a property. Just one. A small duplex in a worn-down neighborhood that most people avoided. But James saw something in it, not just the peeling paint or the broken fence. He saw potential. He'd saved every penny, skipped lunches, took on late-night janitorial gigs in other buildings, sold his old car, and walked to work for months. And one summer evening, with sweat on his brow and courage in his heart, James signed the papers. He became a landlord. No one at work knew. He was still mopping floors by day, but now collecting rent by the first of every month, fixing leaks on weekends, painting walls himself. He wasn't rich yet, but he was moving, one step at a time. A year later, he bought another property, then another. Still the same uniform, still the same storage closet, still the same boss who never looked him in the eye. But behind those quiet eyes, James had become something his boss never imagined. A businessman, a quiet storm, a man with equity, with ownership, with power. And then came the moment that changed everything. It was a cold Monday morning when the news hit the building. The company was in trouble. Rumors flew through the hallways like wildfire. Cutbacks, layoffs, and then a bombshell. The building was being sold. There was panic. Desks were cleaned out. Managers whispered behind glass doors. People updated resumes. And Mr. Carlton? He was furious. "They're selling my building," he roared. "They can't do that. They need me." But the truth was, Carlton didn't own the building. He just managed it. And the new ownership group? They had already signed the deal. 3 men in sharp suits walked in the following week, flanked by attorneys and city officials. James, mop in hand, stood silently in the hallway as they walked past him, until one of them stopped. James. It was Anthony, a younger man, now dressed in tailored navy blue, but once just a tenant in one of James's first rental units. "Didn't expect to see you here," Anthony said, smiling. "You ready for the meeting?" Mr. Carlton's brow furrowed. "Meeting? What meeting?" Anthony turned to Carlton and extended a polite hand. "I'm Anthony Shaw. I represent the group that just acquired this building. We'll be working together. I believe you've already been notified." Carlton blinked. "Wait, you're the new owners?" Anthony smiled. "One of them." Then he turned back to James. "We're starting in 5. You're still on the board, right?" James nodded softly. "Still on the board," he said. Carlton stood frozen. "Board? Ownership? James?" For the first time in years, he saw him, not as a janitor, but as a man he had overlooked. A man who now had a seat at the table. The tables hadn't just turned. They had flipped. Mr. Carlton couldn't process what he had just witnessed. His mind raced, grasping at logic, searching for some explanation. How could James, the janitor he had barely spoken to, be on the board of the company that now owned the building? He watched James walk down the hallway, not with a mop now, but with purpose. He wasn't just walking, he was leading. Carlton followed them into the conference room, uninvited, but too shocked to stay behind. He took a seat at the edge of the room, silent and uneasy. James sat at the head of the long table. He was calm, centered, focused. Papers were passed, terms discussed. And when Anthony turned to James for final approval on a staffing restructure, James looked down the table and asked, "Does anyone have any objections?" Everyone was silent, even Carlton. And then James said softly, "All right, let's proceed." That moment sealed it. Carlton, still in disbelief, approached James after the meeting. He tried to smile, a weak, strained grin. "James, I had no idea you were involved in real estate." James looked at him, finally meeting his eyes. No anger, no gloating, just clarity. "You never asked," he replied. Those 3 words hit harder than any insult. Carlton had spent years walking past James, ignoring his greetings, pretending he didn't exist. And now, here he was, at his mercy. "Listen," Carlton stammered, I think we may have had some misunderstandings before. But I'm sure we can work something out. You know, new beginnings." James tilted his head slightly. He wasn't interested in revenge. He wasn't interested in fake apologies either. He simply said, "New beginnings are for those who see people from the beginning, not after they've made it." Carlton stood there, red-faced, words failing him. James turned and walked away. He had nothing more to prove. That night, James sat alone in his modest apartment. It was quiet, but it wasn't empty. His heart was full. Memories came flooding back. Not of revenge, but of why he started mopping floors in the first place. Years ago, James had been a business student, top of his class. He had big dreams and a sharp mind. But his world came crashing down when his father fell gravely ill. The medical bills were towering, and someone had to step up. So James left school. He took the first job he could get, as a janitor. People laughed. Family doubted him. Even strangers scoffed at the sight of a young black man scrubbing floors like his dreams had died. But what they didn't know was that James never stopped learning. Every break he got, he read. Every night he studied real estate, investments, and business strategies. He saved every dollar, living below his means, watching opportunities others were too proud to see. For 12 years, he cleaned that building, not because he couldn't leave, but because he was observing it, understanding its value, studying the people who came and went. And when the time came, he made his move. He invested in small properties first, then mid-sized buildings. Eventually, through a private equity group he had co-founded quietly, they acquired the very office building he used to clean. It wasn't about power. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about purpose. James had always believed in 3 things: dignity in labor, discipline in silence, and divine timing. And now, everything had come full circle. Word spread fast. The very next morning, when James walked through those familiar glass doors, he wasn't wearing a janitor's uniform anymore. This time, it was a custom-tailored suit. The receptionist nearly dropped her coffee. Security stood up straighter. Even the staff who once looked through him now looked at him, some with confusion, others with awe. But James didn't walk in with pride or revenge in his heart. He walked in with grace. When he entered the top-floor conference room, the board members of the company, the same ones who used to ignore his quiet footsteps on the night shift, were now standing up to greet him. Mr. Wallace, his old boss, looked like he had seen a ghost. Their eyes met. No words were spoken for a long second, but the silence roared. James took a seat at the head of the table. "Let's begin," he said calmly. As the meeting progressed, it became clear. James wasn't just the new owner. He was also their visionary, restructuring outdated policies, eliminating toxic leadership, and implementing a new company culture rooted in respect, equity, and humility. By the end of the day, Mr. Wallace had been relieved of his position, not out of spite, but because the company needed new leadership that had been ignored, undervalued, and overlooked for far too long. And as Wallace packed his things, he passed by the new janitor, a young man named Malik. James stopped him, handed him a card, and said, "If you ever have a dream that feels too big for this room, don't shrink yourself. Grow beyond it." Malik looked confused, then inspired. He didn't know the whole story, not yet, but he saw something in James's eyes. A fire that couldn't be extinguished by rudeness or ignorance or even years of being unseen. It was the look of a man who had turned every insult into intention, every rejection into redirection. Weeks passed. The company began to feel different, not just in structure, but in spirit. Employees who once feared speaking up were now encouraged to share their ideas. Lunchrooms became places of laughter instead of whispers. Departments collaborated rather than competed. But perhaps the most striking change was in how people treated the janitorial staff. No one ignored them anymore. People greeted them by name, thanked them, even asked about their families. Why? Because the story of James, the janitor turned owner, had become a quiet legend in the halls. No official memo had gone out. No press release had been made. But the transformation was felt in every corner of the building. James didn't brag. He didn't need to. His presence alone reminded everyone. You never know who you're talking down to. You never know who's listening while sweeping the floor. And you never know when the tables will turn. Mr. Wallace, meanwhile, had begun working at a small company in a distant part of town. Far from the top-floor office he once ruled. But even in his new position, he carried something heavier than any demotion. Regret. Regret for never saying thank you. Regret for thinking title meant value. Regret for never seeing what was right in front of him. And every time he picked up a coffee or passed by someone in a blue uniform, he paused. Because now he knew, respect costs nothing, but says everything. Years later, the story of James continued to ripple through the lives of many. New hires at the company were often told, "Treat everyone with respect. You never know who you're really speaking to." James had never craved recognition, but he received something even greater, legacy. He had proven something no resume ever could, that humility holds more strength than pride, that hard work done in silence can make the loudest noise. That character is revealed not when you rise, but how you treat others when you're low. Sometimes, people asked James why he never fired Mr. Wallace. And he would smile and say, "Because I didn't want revenge. I wanted change." James understood something rare. Revenge is temporary, but redemption transforms everything. He used his power not to punish, but to heal. Not to intimidate, but to inspire. He became the kind of leader people wanted to follow, not feared to obey. And perhaps the greatest twist in his story wasn't that the janitor became the boss, but that he remained a servant at heart. To James, leadership wasn't a corner office. It was remembering the hallway he once swept, the nights he spent unseen, the kindness he chose even when it was never returned. He showed the world that dignity is not given, it is lived. So the next time you pass someone society tells you to ignore, remember James, and ask yourself, what if they're the future you'll one day answer to? What if the janitor holds the key to the building you think you own? What if the tables are already turning, and you're just not watching? Because in the grand story of life, the smallest moments hold the greatest truths. And sometimes, the person everyone overlooks becomes the one no one can forget.